Hello, Mrs. Wodomski again. I'm going to show you how to set up the sewing machine so that you can sew on the machine to make your project. So first you need to make sure that you have your 2 squares of fabric ready to make your pincushion if you're making a pincushion. You're going to remove the 2 pins that I gave you and give them back to Mrs. Wodomski. She will then give you more pins to use because you want to pin your 2 pieces of fabric together. So I've got this piece of fabric cut. So I've got my 2 4x4 squares. I'm actually going to take the nice sides or the right sides and put them together, line up the edges. If for some reason your edges are not lined up, you can trim them or once we sew them, you can trim them, whichever works better for you. You're going to take the small pins and you're going to go around the entire edge of what you're going to sew, putting the pins into the fabric like this. They should be perpendicular with the side. So they should be hanging out the edge of your side. So now I've pinned around the entire pincushion so that it'll stay together when I'm going to sew. I want to make sure that it's holding the 2 pieces together while I sew so that I don't miss sew. I put 4 into one side, but I feel like that's kind of overkill. So I would say you could probably do 2 aside and be safe to have it not slip while you're sewing. Okay, so I am going to thread my machine correctly. I'm going to have it checked to make sure that it's threaded correctly. My bobbin's been inserted into my machine. My machine is ready to sew. I've changed the stitch length dial to 2 so that I can see my stitches. The stitch width is just the straight line. My needle position is center. My pattern is set to just the straight dashed line that we want for sewing. Everything on my machine should be set up. I want you to make sure that you have this little case here free because this is where you'll put your pins as you're sewing. You're going to line up the edge of your fabric with the seam guide that's closest to the presser foot. So we want the seam guide that is the closest to the presser foot right here. We're going to line up the edge of our fabric with that. Then we're going to keep our fabric in line with that the entire time we're sewing. We put the fabric underneath the presser foot, line up the fabric with that seam guide. We're going to put the presser foot down. I'm going to put my foot onto the foot control, and I'm going to very slowly start to sew. Before I go too far, I need to make sure of several things. I need to remove my pins as I'm sewing. We do not sew over the pins. So you're going to take the pin out. You're going to move it to your case in the front, and then you'll continue sewing. When you start your sewing, you're going to go about 1/2 inch to 1 inch forward. And remember, I'm not pushing or pulling. The fabric is going through the machine by itself. You're going to hit the reverse key to go back over those stitches so that you create a lock in those stitches. I'm going to go forward again, slowly removing pins as I go, keeping my fabric in line with that seam guide the entire time. I'm going to go forward slowly, removing pins as I go along, holding the fabric and guiding it so it stays in line with that seam guide. Remove the pins. And keep going until I get to the corner. When I get to the corner, we need to do something called pivot. So we want to make sure that the needle is in the fabric. If it's not, I turn the hand wheel until it's in the fabric. Lift up the presser foot, swing the fabric so it's in line again with that seam guide. Presser foot goes down, remove the pin, and now I'm sewing perpendicular to the edge that I just did. I've sewn 3 sides of the pincushion. 1, 2, 3. I'm on the third side now. I cannot sew the fourth side because then it's going to be inside out and I'm not going to have my stuffing or my template inside to keep it from the pins from going through. So I'm going to go to the third side and I'm going to reverse stitch. So I've got to hold the reverse key in, and then I'm going to go back over those stitches, and then I'm going to sew right off of the fabric so that I can remove the fabric from the sewing machine. Once I've gone off the fabric, I'm going to lift up the presser foot, turn the hand wheel so that the needle is out of inside, lift the presser foot, then you pull towards the wall or back of the machine, and then we have these threads that we need to cut because they're still attached to the pincushion. So we're just going to take them, swing them, and use the cutter on the back of the machine. So now our machine's still threaded correctly, and we have our 3-side sewn pincushion. So now I'm going to remove the last 2 pins, and I've got to turn it in right side out. The first thing I want to do though is check my stitches to make sure that they're all good and that there's nothing that has any holes in any of the sides. This little spot right here got a little gummed up in the machine, so it's kind of pushed together, which is not great. And then I've got a couple of stitches that are loose, which are going to make the pincushion have a hole. So I could go over this section again to make sure that it is good. The next step I want to do is to trim these edges. I don't want all of this fabric on the outside of my pincushion, so I'm going to trim those using shears. When you're trimming, make sure that you don't cut your stitches. Go very slow. It's a very small section, so you need to be careful so you don't cut your stitches by accident. If you cut your stitches, you've created a hole. You want to go through and trim all 3 sides so that you're taking all of this extra fabric off. And then we're going to do something special at the corners. We're going to create a diagonal cut against the corner, which is going to help it from bunching up when you turn it inside out. So we're going to go around and cut all 4 sides. Okay, I've trimmed all 4 sides. I've got all of this extra material that can go right into the recycle or garbage. I've got my little pin cushion that I'm going to turn right side out. So I'm going to use my opening and I'm going to turn it all the way inside out, or right side out, excuse me. So I've got this nice fabric on the outside, which is what I want to see for my pin cushion. If you want to, you could sew more of this 3rd, 4th side on the machine and then just have a small opening so you could turn it right side out. Actually, no, you can't. I'm sorry, because you have to put your template in here, so don't do that. I apologize. So because I sewed around the edge of this and then trimmed off some, this was my original template that I used, but you can see it's a lot smaller now, so I have to cut the file folder. That's why I asked all of you to make your own template. You have to cut the file folder so that it will fit in the inside pocket of your pincushion. So you want to measure however large your pincushion is against your template and then cut it to be smaller so it will fit inside the template. So now I've cut the template so it's smaller, so it's going to fit in the inside of my pincushion. So I'm going to put that inside my pincushion. It needs to be smaller because we have to sew this last side on the sewing machine, so we're going to sew this last side closed. So now I have my template in there, which is going to create the barrier for the pins to not go into or through the pin. I'm going to take some of the stuffing that's available. I don't need a ton, and you can just cut it with a pair of scissors or shears. And then this gets folded nice and neatly and put on the inside of my pincushion. So I'm going to just stuff it right on the inside of the pincushion, which is going to create that nice spot for it to create the actual. Okay, last step is to sew this closed. So I'm going to go right down the edge. So this is a very hard side to sew, but you can do it. I use the zigzag to make it more decorative, and then I would trim off this excess. So if you have any questions, let me know, but otherwise you're all set to sew. Thank you.